Francisco Chavez was just 6 years old when his father was killed. Fearful of military patrols that had become increasingly threatening, his father went looking for a safer place for his family to live. But while away, he was detained by a group of soldiers and executed.
It's unjust. The army killed my father simply for not carrying this identification card. We can't comprehend the kind of people who were in power in those times.
That was in 1982, when soldiers were sent into indigenous Maya communities to flush out suspected leftist guerrillas. Men, women, and children were slaughtered indiscriminately, and entire villages were destroyed.
There's an air of tranquility here that betrays the level of violence that happened during the 1980s. 32 people were killed, this in a village with just 150 residents.
But years of struggle to bring those accused of genocide to justice might finally prove successful. Former military dictator Efraín Rios Montt's court appearance is something Francisco and other war survivors will not miss.
He should answer for the actions that he committed against the Mayan people.
Human rights activist Juan Velasco is hopeful that cases like this will eventually break the culture of impunity and a threat of retribution that keeps people from speaking out.
This shows that the justice system is fulfilling its obligations to apply justice to those who are responsible for the crime of genocide.
Regardless of the outcome of Rios Montt's court appearance, survivors like Francisco say they will keep fighting for the truth. The memory of their loved ones is too precious to forget. David Mercer, Al Jazeera, in the Ixil Triangle, Guatemala.
Efraín Rios Montt led Guatemala for just 17 months between 82 and 83. He denies the accusations against him, saying he was never on the battlefield. But some of the worst massacres of the 36-year civil war did take place during his rule. In total, around 200,000 unarmed civilians were killed during the war. Rios Montt has been accused in connection with around 1,700 deaths and 1,400 human rights violations. Well, his policies also led to the displacement of 30,000 indigenous people. Kelsey Alford-Jones is from the Guatemala Human Rights Commission, an independent group which monitors human rights in Guatemala. She joins us now from Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us. How do you make of things going on there? Is justice finally coming to the victims of the violence?
Well, I hope so. It's been 30 years since Rios Montt took power in a military coup. In 1982, he dissolved the Congress. He annulled the Constitution and named himself Commander-in-Chief and President. And as your listeners heard, over the next 17 months, he committed under, the state policy of anti-insurgency and the military plans that were created under his government, some of the worst atrocities of Guatemala's 36 years of war. It is an incredibly positive sign for Guatemala's victims and the surviving members of families that were killed during that time to see him sitting in court, to have the charges against him read out in public, breaking the silence and the impunity that has been covering Guatemala for the last 30 years.
You know what the challenge often is in cases like this is how do you pin specific crimes, specific killings to the leader? Is that going to be a big challenge in this case too?
Well, I think there's ample evidence about the crimes that were committed. There are lots of documents, both from the Guatemalan police, the Guatemalan military, U.S. declassified CIA and State Department documents that show the atrocities that were committed, the assassinations committed by the paramilitary and the military. And I think really what's at stake here in this case is the issue of command responsibility and proving that it was not just a policy of brigades or even the Minister of Defense, but that in fact the president of the country oversaw and took part in the planning and enactment of those military strategies that led to the genocide. And I think in today's hearing, the state attorney and the attorney that is accompanying the victims' organizations did show a strong set of evidence proving command responsibility and proving the fact that as President and Commander-in-Chief, Efraín Rios Montt knew what was going on. He propelled this policy in the indigenous highlands, and he did nothing to stop it when he knew that these atrocities were being committed.
Well, there seems to be a trend across the region to move towards either punishing or acknowledging the atrocities of the past in Latin America. Why?
I think it's due in great part to the valiant and hard work of victims' organizations, human rights defenders, and lawyers who are brave enough to take on these cases and have, over the last decade, been gathering evidence, collecting testimony, putting together expert testimony, and have really been pushing their own governments, with the support of the international community, to bring their leaders to trial and have justice for the atrocities that were committed in their nation's past. And I think, you know, the international community, the United Nations, the Inter-American Commission and Court have been helpful, but it really is due to the hard work of Guatemalan victims and survivors and those who are accompanying them in these processes.
All right, you brought some interesting insight into this. Thanks so much, Kelsey Alford-Jones.